financial strain on a lot of countries across the world. One of those countries is Zambia. The country had financial issues before COVID-19, but the effects of the pandemic has not made things any easier. Zambia has accumulated a lot of debt. According to a statement from the country's debt management strategy, it owes about $12 billion in external public debt. This is money owed to foreign lenders, which could be other governments, commercial banks, or international financial institutions. The situation has got to a point where Zambia may default on its debt, essentially failing to pay installments on bonds issued by the government, which are held by banks. This would make the country the first in Africa to do so during this pandemic. Why is this bad for Zambia, and how could this impact the rest of the continent? So how did we get to this point? Zambia is Africa's second largest copper producer, just after DRC, but over the years it struggled with debt. Even back in 2017, the IMF saw Zambia as a high risk for debt distress. The country has been borrowing heavily since 2012, and now $12 billion are owed. Some of this debt is owed by various external Eurobond holders, but a big chunk is owned by China.
Where we have gotten here has been an issue where government has wanted to continue to borrow to manage, to run the economy. You will actually find that even in the current situation where we are, where we have got a very large debt position, government is proposing to borrow another 1.5 billion to run next year's budget.
The country have, due to those debts, is had put off infrastructure like roads, shopping malls and many more. So actually it has affected me positively.
But if the money which is borrowed and it is put to good use to the intended purpose, then I'm happy about that.
So there are some people that have welcomed the country borrowing money because of the infrastructure development. But at the same time, Zambia's debt problem forces the government to spend more money on paying high interest on the debt. Also, Zambia's currency, the kwacha, has declined in value against the US dollar. This makes it more expensive to pay the debt, which is in US dollars. This means less money goes into developing activities like education, agriculture, and health. Less money in these areas has a long-term impact on the Zambian people. The country is now asking for debt relief. It wants creditors to suspend its payments on its debt for about 6 months. Zambia's finance industry said it's already been granted a 6-month extension from China Development Bank. On the 22nd of September, the government asked for its bondholders to do the same on 3 of its Eurobonds, worth about $3 billion. The key question here is, will Zambia be granted its extension? If not, Zambia will default on its debt. One of the issues bondholders have with Zambia is its lack of transparency over the conditions and true nature of its debt with China and Chinese banks. This makes the decision for that 6-month extension tricky.
It is general speculation that the Chinese have only put their investment in key strategic infrastructure, which is the airport, which is specific roads, which is the power utility facilities, and that if we were to default, those assets will be collateralized by the Chinese.
So what happens if a country defaults? Well, it can be complicated and varies from country to country. When a country can't pay its debt, it's not quite the same as when an individual or business can't pay its debt. This is because it's a lot harder for creditors to repossess assets from a country as they would with a business. Going into default gives a country a really bad reputation. It makes creditors less likely to lend money in the future, and if the country does borrow money in the future, it's a lot more difficult and expensive to do so. At the same time though, a default might force a reluctant creditor to go along with the terms of a deal and force them to take a loss on what they're owed. So what about other African countries? Zambia is being watched closely, especially by other countries that owe large amounts of debts to private bondholders, commercial banks, and state lenders like China. Angola is another example. Angola rely heavily on oil, which has been falling in price, and this is an issue that's been scrutinized by investors because the country also has a large amount of debt.
We've seen also markets differentiating between Zambian assets and other classes of assets. I hope that that will continue to be the case going forward. That not all African countries are treated in the same bucket, but there is a differentiation on the basis of levels of debt, of course, but also policy trajectories going forward.
If Zambia defaults on its debt, it wouldn't be the first country to do so. This has happened in the last few decades to countries like Russia, Argentina, and Pakistan. But coronavirus brings its own challenges and could potentially cause more countries